The Man Whore Podcast is sponsored by Pure. The Pure app lets awesome people have casual sex tonight. Download Pure on Google Play or the App Store. Pure, the hookup app that says it's a hookup app. Now let's get to the show.
Welcome to the Man Whore Podcast.
What's up, campers and counselors? This is Billy Presida, and you are listening to the Man Whore Podcast. Oh my God, my voice. What has happened to my once beautiful voice? My 10-year high school reunion, that's what happened. Oh, man. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But let's start off with some scratchy throat show dates. Yes, okay, people. June 6th, I'm going to be at The Stand Comedy Club doing Roast Masters. Going to be doing a roast battle against my good friend and former guest of the show, Allison. That's going to be really fun. Then I'll be in San Francisco. Hey, June 9th, I'll be at Mutiny Cafe and Radio. June 10th at the Spice Monkey restaurant. Spice Monkey really, that doesn't sound politically correct. I don't know what to tell you there. I think they gotta work on that. Although I did hear at a comedy fight club, I did hear an Irish guy get called a famine monkey. And I'm like, wait, what? Oh, man. But anyways, that's the place I'll be performing at. So that should be fun. Also tonight, if you happen to be in New York City and you love trivia, I'm hosting a trivia night at the Watering Hole at 7 o'clock p.m. It would be weird to do trivia at 7 a.m. That sounds terrible. If you're interested in that, go to onspeeddating.com to get your ticket. Use the promo code Billy5 for $5 off. Also today, so many things happening today, May 31st. We have another Fan Whore Facebook Live Hangout, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. To join me for that, go like the Man Whore Podcast fan page. And then you will get a notification when I go live. If you missed this announcement, but you still want to watch, the replay will be available on my fan page for the next month. So those are always fun. I really enjoy, interacting with y'all, playing games, getting to know you. But yeah, my voice, Jesus, it's been a long week of traveling. I was in Indiana. I was in Ohio. I saw a lot of Republicans. It was weird. And then I went up to Connecticut for my 10-year high school reunion, and they're also closing my campus down. My boarding school had 2 campuses, and another school bought my campus. So I went up for like the last hurrah, and I got really drunk. And that's not why my voice sounds like this. My voice sounds like this because driving back, I threw up 3 times on the highway. Shout out to I-84. How you doing? So I apologize for the sound of my voice. I promised the episode with our guest today, Kevin Allison. Oh my God. I promise my voice sounds just peachy for that. Yes, my guest this week is Kevin Allison. He hosts the infamous Risk podcast and storytelling show. He's also a former member of The State, for all y'all from the 90s who remember that show. And I can't wait to share him with y'all in a bit. But first, let's get to some of your emails. Oh yeah, love your emails. This one comes from Taylor. So if y'all remember a while ago, I was just asking people who live in like random countries, like not large countries, places where like my download numbers might be in like the single or double digits. And I get an email that says, "Hey from Fiji," which if you ask certain Americans, they don't realize Fiji's a whole country. It's a what?
It's a water.
Paige, I have a very beautiful naked girl in my bed, and she just goes, "It's a water." Taylor writes, "What's up, Billy? I'm originally from Long Island, New York. I'm currently serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Fiji. I know you like hearing from listeners who are living in smaller countries. Mainly, I'm a sex education teacher here, although it's very conservative and I find a lot of closed-minded people. My sex life is non-existent here. However, I've dedicated the past year and a half while living here to make my future sex life amazing through listening to podcasts like yours. So thanks for being so open-minded and sharing your personal stories with us. I love it. Hope to see you one day in New York City. Oh, what's up, Taylor? I am so thrilled to hear from the source of those 15 Fiji downloads. That is awesome. That's got to be some tough stuff you're doing out there. So kudos to you. I bet you're not looked at kindly by the local parents, but it's important work to be done. Thank you for doing it. And be sure to catch up on that non-existent sex life when you get back to the States. Hey, this next email comes from Justin. Justin writes, "Hey, Billy. Love the podcast. Big ass tip of the hat for your ruthless honesty. I'm a 2 times divorcee with an amazing 5-year-old girl. Recently moved to Atlanta from, let's just say, another major metropolitan area to be with my daughter. Culture shock. Somewhere along the way, I decided to stop paying attention to shame around my sexuality, and the results have been nothing short of amazing. In the last year, I have dropped 30 pounds, gotten a teenager sex drive back, seen a tremendous boost in confidence, and totally redefined how I relate to women. Your podcast has seriously helped me navigate the transition. By the way, the Motor Bunny is awesome. Bought one and tried it today with my main partner. She didn't want to leave. Totally worth the money. I told my partner she had to ask my permission to come while riding it unless I was inside her. After all, it's rude to talk with a mouthful. I literally had to pull myself away. Keep up the good work." Thank you, Justin. And you better, when you bought that Motor Buddy, you better have used my promo code MANWHORE at checkout. For sure. I actually went to go check in on the Motor Buddy website. Currently sold out. Good for them. Good for them. Yeah, guys, if I have a sponsor and they have a promo code like Talkspace, please use the promo code. So I know some of you rich people are really, really giving. And so you think, oh, well, I don't want to I want to pay the full price because I want to support that local business. No. That local business paid advertising money and they need to know it was worth the while by using these promo codes as like a tracking. So, they need to know that the Man Whore podcast sent people. If you don't use the promo code, they don't know I sent you. But I'm so glad you're enjoying the Motor Bunny, Justin. I love getting your emails, whether it be advice questions or feedback such as this or booby pictures. Always feel free to send that stuff to manwhorepod@gmail.com. Hey, so we heard a couple weeks ago, Kenzie share her story of hooking up on the Pure app. I would love to hear more people who have been using Pure since I started advertising them on the podcast. Please send me your Pure hookup stories, whether they be in the form of email or if you would like to give an on-air testimonial, you can shoot me an email and I'll give you instructions on how to do that. There's a free app that I use and it's a very simple process. I just want to know that it's working. I want to know y'all are having fun on it because I got to tell you, it's a cool app. I think it's a useful app. Survey people. I need y'all to do this for me. I don't want to feel like I'm telling you what to do, but I am. I need you to go take a very brief survey. It takes about 40 seconds to do. Please go to manwhorepod.com/survey. It's a quick demo survey. It's pretty much stuff like age, marital status, income, gender, stuff like that. It's about 6 questions long. It's immensely helpful for me, and I'm going to make it helpful for you. If we have 500 responses by the end of June, I'm going to do a sexy giveaway. I've already got a sponsor lined up to give some free shit away to some listeners. But we got to make sure we have at least 500 survey responses. So again, manwhorepod.com/survey. Before we get to Kevin Allison from the Risk Podcast, you all know that on Patreon, I do a whole bunch of bonus episodes. I do 4 bonus episodes every month. Oh my God, that's twice the Man Whore podcast you could have in your life and in your ears. Last week, I released a bonus episode with Willow Wonder, who runs a naked yoga studio. Look, add nudity to anything and you can capitalize on it, such as America. We had a really fun conversation about nudity, bodies, and hey, what to do with your boner. So I want to give you all a little tease of that episode right now for free.
I think it's really valuable to have places where sex publicly is allowed. I think sex parties, as long as they address consent and things like that, I think those are really wonderful environments to explore lots of things. But not every single environment has to be sexual, and I think there can be something really beautiful and powerful and healing about experiencing non-sexual nudity. Non-sexual as in we don't practice any sexual activity and we have rules based on how you can interact with each other. But the real question was to address like the thoughts people have, like, what if I get, like you said, what if I get an erection? Like, what if I get aroused? Or what if I find this person attractive? Or it's like that's okay. Yeah. Like, you can find them attractive. Like, if you catch a view of somebody's something or other, then like somebody's butt, and like, wow, I like this person's butt. Like, okay, whatever.
It's like, just
happens
don't
to all of us.
Fuck them.
Or touch it or anything. Just like. So
there's like these questions where people, like, to them it's this huge, like, what do you even mean? And the answer is so simple. There's a great Mark Norman joke. Mark Norman, I don't know if you're familiar.
No,
super funny comedian, just had a special out, and he has this joke where he goes like, I know this guy who's telling me, he's like, if I was in a gay bar and a gay guy hit on me, I don't know what I'd do. And he's just like, how about not have sex with them? It's like the answers are typically so simple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but it's like, I think it's profound for people to sort of maybe simmer on that for a little bit. Like, oh, because if you think about it, like, we have so many, it definitely makes sense to me why people would have a hard time accepting the idea of like, oh, it's okay to find somebody attractive, and if they're naked, it's okay to, look to even like see them and find them attractive, like, as long as I don't do anything. Because, sex is on one hand, sex is totally shut down in this country, and probably, in many other places as well. But my experience is mostly here, that sex is so put in the closet. It's so scarce. So I talk about in my article, we have like a scarcity complex about sex. So, you walk into, so the idea is like you'd walk into a naked yoga class and you would see naked bodies, and the fear is that you're going to be like, oh my God, naked bodies, sex, I'm going to just like start, I don't know, like running around touching people.
Yeah.
But that's not what happens, but it's also, I think, a product of the fact that sex education and experience and expression are so, they're uncommon for us. Like, I didn't learn what sex was until I was about 16.
Was that from like family, friends?
It's from a joke.
From a joke?
Yeah.
Oh God! What, like a street joke or like a comedian joke?
No, like my friend in class. He's not my friend actually, but he said, why why doesn't Santa Claus have any kids? And I said, I don't know. And he says, because he only comes once a year, which I understand now. But at the time I was like, what? And my friend was like, never mind, we'll talk about this later. And I think I probably went home and I think I probably looked at porn. I tried to watch some videos online, but had no idea what an erection, here I am talking about erections on a daily basis. And I didn't even know what an erection was until I was,
how did you think babies were made before that?
To be honest, I thought I knew there was something about like genitals touching, but I thought the image in my mind was of people sort of in a really tight embrace, and they're always on a really big king size bed, because that's always how sex works, and they're rolling around like a Tootsie Roll, making out, and then bam,
with enough
pregnancy.
friction, with enough rolling around. If you enough speed on the right angle, and you say "I love you" hard enough. You get pregnant.
And then then a baby will come out of that. Yeah. Exactly. So I also think part of that there's like a bit of because there's not enough context where sex is okay. And then there's also this boundary problem where sex is like everywhere. So, like I said, I can't walk down the street without having it be a sexual experience where my body is being objectified, or people go to work and they have their fear of their bosses hitting on them. And, definitely the experience of a lot of women that there's constantly this, you can't walk into a bar without like, whoa, gosh, like everyone is on the prowl, So I feel like there's a lot of sexual energy everywhere because people don't, maybe people don't quite know how to find contexts that are appropriate or boundaries that are appropriate. And so this is basically what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to these are the boundaries, and if you have sexual thoughts, it's also okay.
Yeah. If people are interested in Naked in Motion, or if they want to check out what you do or what you write, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website at nakedinmotion.com.
I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to hear the full episode in its entirety, head on over to patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. Willow's episode is a $10 episode, but you get bonus episodes at any level. You get one bonus episode at the $1 level. You get 3 bonus episodes at $5, and you get 4 bonus episodes and a whole lot more at $10 or more. Again, that's patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. But now for this week's guest, Kevin Allison. Oh my gosh. Storytelling staple, really, in the podcasting and comedy world. Kevin Allison was part of The State, which was a sketch comedy team in the 90s that had a wonderful TV show doing sketch comedy. He also runs this storytelling show called Risk, where people tell the stories they thought they would never tell. And it's interesting when you think about that, because I run a show, and Kevin also runs a show where, like, we share things, we tell stories that most people would never say to their friends, let alone thousands of strangers on the internet. But, one thing I brought up with Kevin is, like, we do deserve, as public figures, I feel like we deserve to have a few secrets. There's 2 or 3 things that, like, I'm not going to say on this podcast, I bet. But it's interesting, like, as storytellers, to figure out which secrets to share and then how to share them. And Kevin gets everyday people, not just comedians and public figures, but he gets everyday people, average Joes and Jills like you, to tell their deepest, darkest, happiest, saddest stories on his podcast. He's been doing that show for, Jesus, I think over a decade now. And we had a wonderful conversation, about kink camp and secret gay kink camp, because those are apparently 2 separate things, attempts to prostitute ourselves, and a whole lot more. You're really going to enjoy this one. Let's get to Kevin Allison.
10 years down the road, you can hit that one.
But isn't that kind of crazy that we put our entire sex and dating lives on the internet?
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you partnered, or are you single, or what's your situation?
It's really weird. I for the longest time, I grew up in that super, super monogamous mindset, because I grew up in a very, very sexually conservative family, Roman Catholic family in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I really did fall for that whole idea that there's only one way that a relationship works, and that is, marrying someone forever and being exclusive and everything. And so it was, when I finally turned 31, I had my first real boyfriend. And I think that what it was that I'd been so freaked out for so many years by the concept of someone being the one and only, that it really, shot me in the foot from being able to date in my 20s. It made dating in my 20s terrifying.
Especially in the 90s, I feel like. The gay scene in the 90s was not necessarily the most monogamous culture.
Yeah, well, you just had this feeling of, oh my God, I've got to be Prince Charming, and he's got to be Prince Charming, and it just puts a lot of pressure on shit. So when I was 31, I had my first real boyfriend, and we both decided, literally like a couple weeks into it, that it was going to be an open relationship. And so that was a real kind of like, yeah, we can do that, can't we? But it wasn't until we broke up in 2010, after 9 years of being together, that I was introduced to the kink scene proper. During the whole time that I was with Ariel, I would go to gay sex clubs, and that was the extent of the sex life that I had outside of my husband. I would go to these gay sex clubs, and it's very interesting because they're not necessarily kinky, and there's very little dialogue. There's very little dialogue in a room full of men. Whereas you go to a orgy or something like that where there's a mix of straight and bi and yada, and there's a lot of talking,
a lot of hangout,
a lot of processing. Yeah. So for years I was having a lot of sex, but did not actually make the connection of being kinky. I mean, I was a preppy NYU college boy who had come from Ohio, where I'd been a preppy, Catholic boy at a Jesuit high school. So I just, the whole like leather scene was very unfamiliar to me in the 90s. And now I'm kicking myself because Giuliani just destroyed sexual culture in New York City. I mean, there used to be places, many places like the Hellfire Club. You could walk into the Hellfire Club and get, pissed on or shat on like upon entering.
Right.
There were hustler bars, where it was officially recognized that everyone is here to buy a boy. There were, all kinds of places like the Lure and stuff like that, where there were always these just crazy big kink nights based on this theme or that theme. And there were like, I would say 4 times as many gay bars in the 90s. So yeah, it really kind of got decimated. Both Giuliani just shutting shit down and internet culture putting everything behind closed doors. People being like, we'll just have a private little party amongst friends of ours,
That's crazy. I never think about how, what it must have been like to be here during that time. Because I also went to NYU, but I got here in like 2007.
Yeah.
And everything's all nice and cleaned up and Disney-fied. But you were, Rudy Giuliani is known more for cleaning up Times Square, but were there other effects that kind of rippled out from all that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Did he, what do you mean by like, did he like shut down the gay
Oh,
bars?
yeah. Like there were a couple of hustler bars where a boy could go, and if you needed extra money, you knew that there were going to be half the room was going to be guys in there, under 25 or so, and half the room was going to be guys that looked like Rush Limbaugh. Huh. And you could go and make money. And those bars just like, bam, when Giuliani, it was always fire code shit. It was, you're not in line with the fire code, so we're shutting you down. Yeah. Or places like the Lure, just, like really kinky party sort of spaces that, or the Vault, places that just ended up mysteriously shutting down. Yeah.
That's
and the Times Square, the peep booth places, even those there were a lot more peep boothy places just around the city in general. Yeah,
Times Square was not always a place to go with your family.
No, it was a real like center of smut and craziness and drugs, sex, drugs, and I mean, the Beats used to love it. Back in the 50s and 60s, they. You hear a lot from Ginsberg and those guys talking about it. But yeah, we romanticize New York in the 60s and 70s. But people who do remember it say, okay, yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was also kind of dangerous and messy, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
but that's what makes it fun. I don't know.
I know. You lose so much.
What was it? I feel like Geraldo had like a whole bit about how like you'd have tourists from all over the world would come to like New York City to like jerk off in our booths. Like,
that's amazing.
Maybe it was somebody else, but it was like, like it was a very pervy area. But this, I guess, is a good time as any to say I'm sitting here with Kevin Allison, host of the hit podcast Risk.
Yes.
Hello. He's like, yes, I affirm your assertion that I do indeed host this podcast. And a very funny comedian and storyteller and a former member of the State. For those of you from that era, I was 3, so I don't know where I was. It was 94, right?
Yeah, 94,
entering kindergarten. I don't know
I
was allowed to watch that back then. But thanks for sitting down with me.
Yeah. I've been doing my podcast Risk since 2009, and the whole idea of it is I grew up conscious of the fact that I was gay from day one. Like literally, like my first conscious thoughts are I like boys' butts. I mean, I remember being 5 years old and being totally conscious of what the words gay and fag meant. I knew it meant, a boy who likes boys, but I also knew it meant horrible, awful,
Yeah.
lame, rejectable, get it out of here. We don't want to have anything to do with it. So I grew up terrified, and I grew up super, super aware that I was in the closet. And so there came a time when I was 39 years old where I realized, oh my God, I've been so fearful in my career about being myself because I had spent so much time as a sketch comedian. I thought, what would it be like if I started just coming out about the warts and all personality that I have, the goofiest side of myself, the kinkiest side of myself, the most emotional side of myself? What if I created a storytelling show where people say shit that they could not possibly say on NPR, on shows like The Moth or This American Life? And so that's what Risk is. I mean, we've featured stories from people who have killed other people. We featured just a couple weeks ago a story about a woman who found out her dad was into cannibalism, and she had to deal with her own feelings of being kind of titillated by that herself.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's the same chick I talked to on Tinder last year who was into that.
Oh my
That freaked me
God.
out. And that was always my limit. I was always like, no, your kink is not my kink and it's okay, but I draw the line at cannibalism. Then I talked to a girl on Tinder who's like really into it. I'm like, well, let's keep talking. Like, let's see if we can make this work. She's real pretty. Like,
Yeah.
there's a certain threshold of hotness where I'm like, I'll hear you out.
Well, the Melina Williams has told an amazing story on Risk about race play. She's a black woman who got interested in BDSM play where she would be like a plantation slave and with a white person acting like a, whip cracker kind of guy. And so that is really, really psychological loaded shit. She told a story about it on Risk called Slave, but it turns out she also wrote a book called Taboo. It's a tiny little book, but you can find it on Amazon. And it's about like 5 main areas of BDSM sort of play or kink play, fetish play that most people, even in the kink community, consider like third rail, are nervous about and consider taboo. And of course, in some cases with, for example, cannibalism, there's legality. I mean, there are certain lines you cannot cross because of the law. And thank goodness for that in some cases of, being
Right, yeah.
nice boundaries.
If you took the whole like all being inclusive thing too far, then you're like, well, you gotta let him eat the guy.
yeah,
Because that's
absolutely.
his thing. That's his sexual orientation. He eats people. You gotta let him.
Yeah, well,
so that's why we need limits.
There was an interesting story once on Risk about a guy who wanted to be castrated. And I think that the dom, the woman who did it, she wanted to to have him guessing whether or not it was actually happening,
Yeah.
or just she was using a lot of Hollywood special effects equipment. It's kind of fascinating to see how there is that people can play with their imaginations. In some of my experiences, there's this probably one of the best known stories on Risk is a story called Kevin Goes to Kink Camp. It's 2 episodes long. I go to this kink camp for about 4 days and just taste and try everything I possibly can. But I remember when I was there, at one point I was playing with someone in one cabin and I could hear from the cabin next to me this couple who were acting out that she was 12 years old and that he was like a teacher or something that was like molesting his student. And they were being very specific with it in the language. I mean, she was calling out that she was 12 years old,
Yeah.
And it was really quite fascinating to me because it was just like, oh, okay. I see, that was my first, I guess, ever exposure to that sort of age play where there's an acknowledgement that what's being done there is rather molesty in what it's bringing to mind, which is definitely taboo and definitely crosses into the legal territory, but it's role play.
We need a better adjective than molesty, because molesty sounds too cute. Oh, that guy's a little molesty. Oh, that sounds adorable. Right?
Speaking of that, there is a great book that probably all of your listeners would be interested in called Perv by Jesse Baring.
Oh, right. Yeah. He
Yeah.
also has the, I think is he the same guy who did Why Is My Penis Shaped Like That?
I don't know. He's a psychologist who lives in
New Zealand or
Yeah,
Australia, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think he has books like that, kind of sciencey books.
Yeah. Very interesting. Like one of the chapters on it is all about age of consent. And it's what was fascinating about it was I think it was Columbia University. I think some researchers at Columbia University asked something like, now I might be getting the actual details of this wrong, but something like 1,500 students had you ever had an experience when you were a minor with someone who was above the age of consent with an adult? And was it a positive experience? Do you look back on it as being a positive experience or a negative experience? I don't know if there was an in-between, like an indifferent. But what was fascinating about that study was that it was like right down the line 50-50 of people saying, the people who said, yes, I did have that kind of experience. People saying, I mostly look back at it as a positive experience, and other people saying, I mostly look back at it as a negative experience. Pretty goddamn fascinating and not what you would expect. I mean, we've had stories on Risk of people who had experiences, who were molested or whatnot, or coerced or raped or whatever when they were kids. And some of those stories are horrifying, are just so... I mean, you can tell that this person has spent a lot of time working with it. We're in Denver tomorrow. Tomorrow night we're in Denver. Young man. I mean, I think he was 15 years old, and his, I think, English teacher just like totally pursued him, and they had a relate. I mean, they went to Mexico together. It was like a thing. And it's kind of fascinating the way that, we're trying to delve into, because for him it was not necessarily a negative experience, but he still has a lot of fucked up feelings about it anyway. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I always find it in people's actual stories, pulling apart, poking at them like a therapist of, all right, let's go beyond the stereotypes of the real weird, questionable nuances of how you felt about things,
Are you tired of trying to meet people online and it just stays online? Then you need to check out my sponsor, the Pure app. Pure takes you from in-app to in real life in a matter of hours, literally. You make a request to meet someone that only lasts for 1 hour at a time, and if there's mutual interest, you have just 1 hour to make plans in a chat window before it disappears. And everyone on Pure is there for the same reason. For some fun, safe, awesome, casual sex. Download Pure from the App Store or Google Play. Pure, getting you from online to offline to getting off. Now back to the show. You're hearing so much of people's personal lives. Do you have to sometimes turn your empathy switch off, or do you just get overloaded with fucking emotions?
No,
fucking week in and week out.
I have I think I have a natural ability to compartmentalize things. I mean, there are some cases where I do get emotionally wrapped up and kind of exhausted. I think it's more exhausting to me when I'm having a hard time pulling it out of someone. Because what I always tell people for Risk is, for example, a couple, 3 episodes ago, I told the story about how I was recently at this all-male kink camp. Yeah. Last August, I went to this all-male kink camp.
For those who went to the regular kink camp, it's not enough dudes. We're all the fellow gay men.
Well, it's interesting because this camp is indicative of where all that came from. Mm-hmm. And where it came from is the motorcycle clubs of the 50s and stuff. That's why you see stuff like Tom of Finland drawings. So it's when you go to these, when you even look at FetLife, for example, what you're looking at is that at some point in the 80s or so, a bit of the culture that gay men were so crystallizing and building such a rich history of in the, say, 40s, 50s, 60s started to cross over, so that like there's this really, really fascinating divide. Like everyone, when I went to Dark Odyssey, other men there told me.
Dark Odyssey, of course, is another. That's the camp, right?
That's the camp. That's the pansexual camp.
Yeah, I have some friends who have gone off.
Yeah. Like it's a big, like 1,500 people show up for camp for a weekend, and it's a people of all walks of life, trans people, bi people, lesbians, everything around the board. But I would talk to men there, and they'd say, "You got to know about," and I can't even name.
Is it that secret?
Yeah,
it's a secret.
It's a secret society.
Not just a gay kink camp. It is a secret gay kink camp. It's the Fight Club of kink camps.
Because that's where it comes from. It comes from the motorcycle clubs where initially, back in the day, you were supposed to kill someone or beat someone up in order to get a sponsor to get into the motorcycle club. Well, those leathery dudes, some of them liked secretly hooking up with each other. So in the 50s and 60s, you started having really, really secret leather guys saying, let's form our own little camp. You still have to have a sponsor. You still have to be invited. You still have to have people vouching.
Still got to kill somebody to go.
You don't have to kill
in the old days
anymore.
of the gay kink camp, you actually had to kill a guy, but they're really soft these days. Our generation really softened things up.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. So, but people warned me, that at an all-male camp like that, you are not going to go through a big orientation about what consent and negotiation is. You are not going to, you might be ambushed. You know what I mean? I mean, there are certain when you're among men, the ideas around consent become a lot more lax, a lot more improv, a lot more. There's an expectation, and I've seen it in gay sex clubs and orgy spaces before, where if someone's bothering you, it's not so out of line or unexpected for you to shove or hit them away as just like, I told you twice, get the fuck away from me.
Or find someone who, like a guardian, if their party does a guardian system or something. I mean, I think the better parties in New York City have some sort of, that's why I got this bracelet is the party I go to. They hand these out. Like, I consent to touch, which means like you're fair game to kind of more touch without asking versus not.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is in an all-male space, it's more, you don't like someone touching you, you can hit them. And there doesn't need to be any idea of aftercare or whatever there. You know what I mean? So it's I think that some gay men they have fear around being around spaces with women, and other gay men will go to some of these pansexual kink camps and be a little bit taken aback by the degree to which there has to be a lot of talk about consent and negotiation.
Do you think that needs to change in that scene, or do you think that's like just a part that's a core part of that culture? Or?
I actually don't think it's something that needs to change in that scene, but I do think that it's useful for everyone to at least be conversant about these things. You know what I mean? Like, I can easily see, looking back at some of my own experiences, times when someone was rough with me when I didn't want him to be, or times when I felt really, abusively treated, where I didn't have the language or the knowledge of, okay, here's ways that people sometimes deal with this sort of thing. So I think that it would be very, very helpful for gay men to at least be more aware of the way that conversation is so alive on the other side of in the more straight areas of the kink community. But I don't necessarily think that gay men have to adopt all of it. There's a very funny story told on Risk by Amy Salloway, where she attends a lesbian orgy, and every 15 minutes a bell goes off so that they can process how things are going. So that is like the opposite of what gay men are about. I attended something at Dark Odyssey called Cruising in the Woods, and it was supposed to be based on gay men cruising in like, the rambles in Central
Sounds
Park.
like a fun version of Manhunt, like when you were kids.
I had to explain to several of the women there, no, we're not all chit-chatting down here. Like the idea of cruising in the woods isn't laughter, conversation, chit-chatting. No, shut the fuck up. That's not the tone of cruising.
So what was the cruising in the woods? Is it just walking around the woods, and when you do some sort of hand signal, it's like, okay, let's bang? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gay men have always relied on a system of making eyes with someone, judging from the eye contact, is this guy going to kill me, or am I maybe going to be able to get it on? Just going, one of the first stories I ever tell on Risk is just walking into Central Park in the middle of the night is the kind of activity where if your antennas are up, you could have sex with another man there if you just know how to make eye contact, feel it out, and then,
What are some key parts of this eye contact? Like, I feel like it seems like there's a way to fuck it up.
It's an energy thing. I mean, people sometimes say that, like, what are there, like, there are some places, like back when I was in the hustler bars, when I was attempting to prostitute myself back in the day, those guys literally did have little hand signals to one another of stuff like, that guy's mine, that guy's a cheapskate, little like, brushing your nose or tugging at your ear or whatever. But no, in actual just normal cruising, it's literally just, it's an energy thing. It's reading someone's eyes and being like, that guy looked, like, for example, I was once in the subway on 14th Street at like 4:00 in the morning. It was after a catering gig, so I was dressed in a tuxedo, but I happened to have some poppers in my pocket, and the platform was mostly empty. And there's this guy in a jumpsuit, in a kind of like a yellowy or whatever jumpsuit. He's a transit worker. Yeah. He's a guy who works on the tracks, and he's in his worker's uniform. Very, very blue-collar looking guy, Italian, very studly, right? And he's looking at me. And I look back at him, he looks back at me, and there's just something about the energy where I'm like, oh, that guy looks like the straightest guy in the world, but this is about to happen. And that guy, I'm sure, is the straightest guy in the world in his life. You know what I mean? That's another thing about cruising and gay, orgies and stuff like that is one of the reasons there's very little conversation is that a lot of guys prefer to think of what they're doing in that cruising or gay sex underground sort of thing as being like a dream, being in the unconscious, like dislocated from the rest of their life. So, if you ask someone for their phone number or try to be all, polite and get to know them, they might be a little bit thrown off by that. But anyway, yeah, I blew him right there on the subway platform.
Clapping. Very nice. I still have not gotten subway platform yet. It's still on a list of places in New York.
Yeah.
I am but young, I like to think. There's time to get it out of the way. When talking about the whole consent stuff and how you can. So let me get this straight. So if someone's like hitting on you or like tries to touch and whatever, and you don't want it, and you bat them away a couple times, and they still go for it, you can just slug them. That's like kind of the unspoken policy.
I think that's the unspoken understanding. I mean, it's just like what I kind of grew up with. I mean, I think times are changing around all of that. But it's just like the Times Square thing where you lose something and you gain something when things change like that. Like there is something kind of magical about all that nonverbal communication and all that, we haven't discussed a bunch of rules beforehand kind of encounter.
But there's something super like hyper masculine about having a policy like that. Like that. It's like, well, at the all guy gay orgy, if you don't want to fuck a guy and he tries to fuck you, you just slug him. There's something like very man about like a hyper masculinity thing kind of going on where that would never be acceptable at like a mixed orientations play party.
Right. And it's also nothing that is ever even talked about like I'm talking about it now amongst other gay men. It's just kind of the way things tend to work.
Yeah. So, and something else that stood out to me is you said attempt to prostitute yourself. So you were unsuccessful in the venture?
Yeah, one of
That makes me all sad. It's like there's just the idea of somebody attempting to prostitute themselves and like just not finding a John makes me go sad face.
Yeah. There's a story on Risk that I tell called The Hustler, and it's about the first time that I went to one of those places up in the Upper East Side, and I got into a fight with the guy that I was supposed to be hooking up with, and I really didn't. One of the things about hustling is that a lot of people don't appreciate is. You got to kind of like it. You got to kind of like the role play and the flirtation and just the sort of power exchange that comes from there's just a real weirdness there because you're being paid because you're in maybe not a desperate situation, but you're not as powerful when it comes to finances, right?
Right.
But you've got to act like you are the you're the boy. You're the object of desire. Yeah. So
there's a dollar amount attached to your being or sexuality or
Right.
looks or whatever it is.
Right. And so you've got to flirt, but not be too easy, and then you've got to do some little, like nonverbal negotiation too. That was one of the reasons I was not good at hustling was I'm just not good at negotiations that entail money or business transactions. And there's a way to do it flirtatiously where you're not getting too caught up in businessy kind of talk, of course, but I wasn't even good at that. So I really was not cut out for hustling, and it became more of a comedy of errors than anything. Yeah.
I may or may not be getting my first prostitution gig this weekend.
Oh!
Yeah, it's fingers crossed.
Yeah.
There's somebody coming for the weekend. She's a listener, and she's like debating whether or not. So she's like, "Can you give me a number just in case?" Because she wants to take the cash out.
Yeah.
And it's like $1,000. Because I always thought like if I'm gonna prostitute myself, it's gonna be for like a size like something that I can put down on my credit card debt or something.
Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, so I don't know. By the end of the week, I'm going to know if I have officially fulfilled my fantasy of like getting paid for sexual activity.
Yeah, I had a guy about 3 years ago who offered to pay me, an older man who I'm 47 now, so he was probably in his 60s or something like that, who offered to pay me to spank him, and I was really looking forward to it. I thought, well, that would be fun because I just enjoy spanking in general, and what the hell?
And an easy way to make some money.
Oh my God! Yeah. I am not ashamed to admit that I pay for it. I'm stuck with a inconvenient taste, but actually very common taste when there is this whole daddy boy phenomena in the gay world, and there always has been the Socrates and Plato thing of I was attracted to guys my own age my entire life. Like when I was a toddler, I was attracted to toddlers. When I was a teenager, I was attracted to teenagers. But once I was like getting into my late 20s, I was like, oh, now they're all younger. You know what I mean? Now I'm still attracted to those guys in their early 20s mostly, So that's kind of a bummer to learn when you start to enter your 30s and 40s, because it's like, well, first of all, there's not as much of a peer understanding that the way that you communicate with someone who's younger is just gonna be different in some ways.
Oh yeah.
But it's also difficult because I think it's funny. Like one of the things. Here's another way that things are a little different in the gay male realm than they are in. Like if I was on your show right now and I was a straight guy and I was saying, "Oh, here's the thing. I'm mostly interested in guys half my age." And they tend to be non-white guys. They tend to be Latin or Asian.
This is a hypothetical?
Yeah, right. I think that would be rather controversial. I think that as a gay man, I have a little more leeway to talk about that, but I think that is becoming more and more controversial to say, I have a type, the age difference happens to be considerable,
yeah,
and there's race involved in it too. That really freaks
Add race
people
to
out.
anything, people get freaked out.
Yeah.
Add race in front of the name of a salad. I
Yeah.
think people would be nervous.
Right, because if you say I'm into tall guys or I'm into guys with red hair or whatever, like, there's not that doesn't have as much to do with family, history, politics, prejudice, laws, race gets messy with all that shit. Yeah.
I'm so thankful I don't have things like a type like that.
Oh my God. That is the ultimate blessing.
Being a straight dude with no specific type and no kinks.
Ooh.
Like just because, and everyone I know has any of the other things going on for them. So every time I talk, I'm just like, Jesus, your life sounds exhausting. I'm so sorry.
Oh
Like,
my God. No.
It sounds way more difficult to find someone to fuck around with.
Oh, it's like a needle in a haystack. That's why I pay for it, because my tastes are so specific in guys and in the specific kinks that I like, that it's just like, God damn, like the just talking to and Jesse Baring talks about that in the book Perv too. He says that it's a lottery. You pull the handle and you get like the three things that come up on the whatever the what do they call those slot machines, right. And one of them is orientation, preference, and I forget and maybe fetishes,
Sure.
Whatever your lotto thing, the more specific it is, the more fucked up you are.
Yeah.
I mean, screwed as far as like possibly finding partners.
It makes it difficult. Yeah. Where do you go to shop around for your young Asian boys? Where's that catalog?
There's a site called Recon, which has been around for longer than any of the other apps. Like, so you talk about Tinder. Tinder came from Grindr, and Grindr came from Recon. Recon it's a GPS-based app for kinky guys looking for kinky guys.
One of us. Gooble gobble. Hey, time for the fan whore appreciation moment. I want to give a shout out to the patrons who are one of us. Those of you who support me on Patreon, I always like to give you a shout out on every show. So here's a few people who deserve some recognition. Gregory Young. Greg hosts the Bowery Boys podcast, which is a phenomenal show. It's one of the few podcasts I personally listen to. It's a great show if you're into history, the city of New York, or puns. I am not a fan of puns. But thank you, Greg, for your longtime support, man. Chris with a K, also a longtime patron. Chris with a K from South Dakota always brings it come fantasy football season. I'm looking forward to smacking you down in our third season this year. For some newer patrons, Claire, hey, girl. I notice you're an avid knitter. Well, you know what? I'm going to knit two, purl two together in your honor. Thanks for your support. And finally, Donald W. with a wicked nice pledge up from Massachusetts, man. Thank you for joining the crew. And you too can join our community of fan whores and receive a slew of great rewards on Patreon. If you don't know what Patreon is, it's kind of like a monthly fan club subscription meets Kickstarter. Like, you pledge a certain amount of money per month, and depending on how much money you pledge each month, you get various rewards which range from bonus episodes of the Man Whore Podcast, condoms, and access to the Champagne Room, our super secret Facebook fan page, our super secret Facebook group for patrons only. Join the club by visiting patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. That's Patreon, patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. Kevin Allison also has a Patreon for the Risk Podcast. This is a great opportunity to support two fantastic independent content creators in one fellow swoop. Head on over to both of our Patreons. Give us a few shekels for putting out amazing free content week in and week out. Now back to a couple sluts.
But there are all sorts of little, specific fetish sites now, like Piss Boy for guys who are into, whatever you can think of. There's probably a little site for people hooking up around that.
Well, yeah, of course there's that. But like when you're going to go pay for it, like, do you have a specific place?
No. That's I don't. I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
I've never used like Rent Boy or anything like that before. I just happen to have a particular, a couple of guys that I know that I've already established relationships with, right?
Do you meet those people like in person?
Yeah,
or did
yeah. And that's just stuff that's been negotiated over time. Sure. But yeah, there are still, I think there's something called Rent Men right now. Rent Boy got
the big shutdown.
Yeah. But yeah, if you go to a site like that, like those prices can get pretty steep because those guys, they have other competing people who want to pay, and so they're like, "All right, I'll make my price."
Oh, so you just found you found some good deals.
Yeah. Amongst guys who were already like friends with benefits. Yeah.
So now Risk isn't just with celebrities or comedians when there's plenty of like regular people talk too.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. We have everyday people. We don't use voice altering technology because it's just too fucking weird.
And these are read in their own voice.
Oh, they're not read. They're presented on stage or in person. So, for example, the woman who told the story of finding out that her dad was into cannibalism, she shared that with me just one-on-one with like this, but then we edit me out and add music and sound design.
Okay.
And then the live shows, that's a different vibe because you're getting up in front of an audience and confessing whatever it is. Now, the Risk stories are not just about sex. I mean, people will come up and talk about anything that was especially emotional or personal or private, or just, that they feel like, oh my God, I'm really going out on a limb sharing this. So some of the stories are hilarious. Some are just gorgeous that'll bring you to tears, and some will fucking freak you out. Yeah.
And you do plenty of your own stories too. I mean, and it's a weird thing to be like a person like us who just put our whole lives out for people to hear and learn, especially something so intimate like sex and dating. Does that make your dating life any more difficult? Or interesting? Grinder dates that start with like, "Hey, I checked out your podcast."
Yeah, I think it actually does make it easier. I think that is a little, and I don't shy away from that. Like, for example, on my Recon profile or whatever, I will mention that I have taught a class at a kink camp before called "Everything You Can Do to an Ass Other Than Fuck It." And one of the reasons I share that is just to give you a hint of, well, here's something I like.
Please tell me you have a webinar too for it. People can go to whatyoukandowithanass.com, and for $39.99 you can learn all the things.
Yeah. Well, I have the times that I have done it, I have had a demo bottom, so that's fun,
right?
To be able to show what I'm talking about with a fella there.
Did you have to get used to? I mean, you also like on a celebrity level though before starting Risk, of course. But, at some point, did you have to get used to people knowing your whole sex life? Because before Risk, it's not like you had your sex life available on the internet for people to download, correct?
Yes, that is true.
Is that a thing to get used to in dating?
Yeah. Well, Risk was very much it's a constant coming out process. In fact, in the process of doing Risk, it was literally like someone dared me to go to a kink camp in the spirit of Risk, because people often will do something that they think is risky to come back and share about, and then see, if they do want to share about it. So someone dared me to go to a kink camp in 2011, and that's where that story, Kevin Goes to Kink Camp, came from. But it kind of opened a Pandora's box. I think sometimes people worry, oh my God, if I start exploring kink, will I find out that I like some things that I hadn't expected before? And in my case, yeah. And at a certain point, some of it fucked me up a bit. At a certain point, some of it was like, whoa, I didn't know I'd ever be into this. I mean, I'm 40. I was, in my 40s. I'm like, why am I discovering new stuff? I thought I had all this figured out. And so I got a therapist, a fella who I got from Kink Professionals, I think, Kink Aware Professionals. If you Google that, Kink Aware Professionals, you can find a therapist near you who is BDSM friendly.
And that's so important to find those, or people who are like therapists who are sex positive.
Yeah, they're not going to pathologize. Yeah.
That can be hard to find.
But yeah, he's encouraged me that, you don't have to tell it all. You don't, there are some stories that, hey, you might wait 10 or 15 years to get around to sharing that one. Like on a recent episode of Risk, I shared about, I think I started to talk about this a moment ago and then got sidetracked, but it was about being ambushed at this gay male kink camp, which means, a bunch of guys not really having official consent tackle you. They put me in handcuffs. They brought me out of the dungeon to this grassy knoll and shoved me down on my knees and had a bunch of men piss in my mouth. It's a story that I told on an episode called Make Believe, a recent episode of Risk called Make Believe. And it was funny because I was a little nervous about sharing it because I knew that piss drinking was going to trigger some people's yucky, Yeah. Some people would be squicked out by it.
And it's like, grow up, people. Grow up.
But knowing that I've done weirder shit, that it was actually what made me feel the license to be like, yeah, fuck them if they can't handle that. There's other stuff I'm like, I don't know if I ever can share the story about that.
Right.
But the piss stuff, sure.
And we were talking about before we started, and I'm not going to say the thing, but it's like, it's like I feel like as people in the public eye, we deserve to still have a couple secrets.
Yeah.
And it's odd to be someone who shares like all of it, except like, these one or two things.
Yeah.
And people go like, what do you mean you have a secret? You'd share all of it. I was like, yeah, but like we're entitled to have a little bit of that.
Well,
and,
there's also like being a true storyteller. I'm very, very aware of the other characters that enter into the story. So, I allow anyone who does Risk to go by a fake name, to name other characters in their stories fake names, to put it in a different city than you were actually in, or even a different decade or whatever. But just to protect people's privacy. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's like, well, my husband, there's only one of those. Or my mom, you know who that is. So, so sometimes you think to yourself, well, if this person ever heard it, or if it ever came around to them that it was out there, it would be a disaster. So maybe I should, keep that one to myself.
Is there a story you've shared in your professional career that you then later regretted sharing for like privacy reasons of your own or other people's?
Well, there's always the issue of my mom, which is ironic because I think that in an archetypical way, in a big psychological Jungian way, that she is the reason that I started a podcast called Risk in the first place. To, at the age of 39, finally say, I'm going to stop worrying about what my mom would think about what I'm doing professionally, saying on stage. So she can't download podcasts. She has no internet savvy whatsoever. But she has been exposed to, because Risk tours a lot,
Sure.
Friends who live in Cleveland or whatever being like, there was an article in the paper that said Kevin has tied things to his balls. And
Yeah, some of that you can't avoid. But like, is there something you maybe like a story you told on the show, and then you were like, maybe like whether it was like immediately or maybe years later, you're just like, ooh, maybe like that's one of those secrets I would have rather held on to a little longer.
No, I really haven't, because there are certain wordings of things, like Risk has gotten into the territory now where there are very, very, very often big political correctness battles that emerge because of certain stories on Risk. And I would say it's like every other week we feature a story where people are like, that sounds too rapey to me, or that sounded a bit mean-spirited, the way that person referred to his handicapped sister, or whatever it is. Like there's a brouhaha that blows up. It'll be often, a matter of tone or phrasing, or just something about the storyteller's vocal delivery, or even the way the audience laughed at something, which will really freak people out. And people are calling for more and more for trigger warnings. They want me to say, hey, I got to hold your hand here before we share this story. You know what
the trigger warning is? When if pee. If hearing someone talk about pee is a trigger for you, you know when the trigger warning is the first mention of the pee, and then you turn it off.
Well, what I say is that actually the title of the series, Risk itself, is an overall trigger warning. You know what I mean? It's like these people's lives did not come with trigger warnings. They're sharing about experiences that were surprising to them in the moment. That's why it's a story. So the way a story works best, if it's presented to you as a surprise when it's happening in the story as well.
Also, it's like when you hear the trigger warning, like if you're triggered by the word, if curtain's your trigger,
Right.
Whether you hear curtain 5 minutes into the story at that surprise moment, or when we say trigger warning, we talk about curtains, you're going to be surprised and you're going to hear the thing. So why don't you just like stop listening when you hear the story or hear the thing you don't like? You just get to hit stop. Like you don't.
Right. I mean, I've tried to find a happy medium with it by simply, if something really violent is about to happen on the show, and very often something really violent does happen on the show, I'll let people know, hey, this one's going to get pretty intense. You know, this one involves someone getting kind of harmed in a way. So just buckle your seatbelts. And I don't want to say trigger or anything like that, but I'll just give people just a conversational sort of like, hey, just letting you know, here's where we're veering. Here's the neighborhood we're about to drive into.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, dude. One time I was at the first burlesque show I ever attended was in Philadelphia, and it was they always made it themed based on a different director's body of work. So maybe there was John Hughes night or whatever. So the one I happened to go to was Stanley Kubrick themed.
Oh yeah,
which is terrifying when you add titties to the mix. and they do Lolita, and they do some guy did like Boylesque for Full Metal Jacket, but then the closer was a Clockwork Orange, and yes, they do that scene.
Yeah, and
the woman, the host. She goes up to present the last number and says, and it's from Clockwork Orange. And, if anyone here has been triggered by like anything like sexual assault, maybe this is a good time to go get a cigarette. Yeah. But she's doing, this is a good time to go do that. But we're in a venue space where it's like, it's just one long, it's just like, 12 rows of chairs or whatever. And the door is kind of over here where to leave, you got to get up and then walk out through this crowd. So she's just been like, hey, if you've been raped and this is going to trigger you, can you just like stand up and show everybody that you've been sexually assaulted as you walk out the door? It's like, it's like, what do you want them to do?
Right. Well,
it's like there's a terrible trigger warning.
You do have to be conscious. I mean, like for example, there have been live stories told on Risk, in other words, in front of an audience, where someone will tell about a violent rape, and I will sometimes we've even had been able to have someone in the audience that was like a professional, and I'll be able to let people know, hey, this story is going to venture into this sort of territory. And there's actually someone at the back who could give you some literature if you want to talk, often on Risk, I'll say, oh, hey, and if you want to know, recently a fella shared about an incestuous vibe between him and his mom, and that how that kind of affected his sex life now. Like he still has kind of every now and then erotic momish fantasies, and he went into great detail about that, and it was definitely uncomfortable, that story. And then afterwards, I let everyone know this goes into uncomfortable territory. And then afterwards, I let everyone know there's actually an organization you can go to if you have any feelings about incestuous sort of experiences you might have had, So, yeah, I think that there's a happy medium with all that stuff where you don't have to beat people over the head with it, but you definitely have to be mindful if you're, daring to go into that kind of territory.
Is there a realm is there a topic that you've thought, a taboo thing you've thought of for a while that just no one's yet told a story about.
Well, it's interesting because, like I said, we've had a castration story on before. We've had a cannibalism
Big
story.
check marks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. We've never had a necrophilia sort of story before, which I know some people do role play around
Fingers
that.
crossed.
We've never had a scat story on the show. I mean, we have had people who have eaten shit for other reasons, which would take a long time to explain.
We've had shit-eating stories, but it wasn't sexy.
It wasn't
We
erotic.
want a sexy shit-eating story.
I know they're out there, and I always tell people, listen, you can share anonymously on the show. We can't make your voice sound different. We're
Sure.
not going to do that, but you can share anonymously, and you can change the names of other characters in your story. So yeah, no, there's a book called Sexual Outsiders, and it's about specific. It's also kind of like that book Taboo about specific, BDSM sort of encounters that this fellow who wrote it is a therapist, and so I think it's about a lot of patients he's had. But the chapter where there's a chapter on scat, and there's a lengthy personal story in it between two gay men, and it's surprisingly, well, not surprisingly based on what I've dealt with in Risk so far, but it's really, really intense and intimate and like very erotic and very, I don't know, just an amazing, and that I would love to find that kind of story for Risk.
So if anybody out there has got a sexy shit-eating story, if you have a shit-eating story, we got plenty. Don't bother. But if it's a scat,
But if there's an
fetish
erotic
one,
edge to it,
yeah. Or necrophilia, apparently.
Right, yeah.
Have
I'm
one of
trying to
those.
think, is there anything else? I mean, we've never had anyone talk about an age play sort of story where it was conscious age play. I mean, we've had some molestation stories on the show, but like I was saying, like those folks at camp that I saw that one time, like very consciously doing like a Lolita-esque sort of role play. That would be kind of fascinating.
I'm surprised that in all these years you haven't, because I feel like that fetish, that kinks, that's out there now. There's enough so that if you go to the sexuality section of iTunes, there are multiple Big Little and age play oriented podcasts.
We had one. We've had a couple that were food that were related to like, feeding someone to the point of getting fat, where for some reason the story itself did not come together in a way that I was really psyched about, beginning, middle, and end. There's a problem with that. We've also had one time which just had an amazing detail in it, but it was about a woman who was a dominatrix who was hired to do a porno. A fella who he was a what do you call it? Conservative Jew, a Hasidic.
Oh yeah.
He was Hasidic, and he was like, okay, yeah, I want to agree to be in this video that you're doing, and I want to be beaten. I want to be slapped and physically beaten by the dominatrix. And so the woman was like, great, we'll film this. We've got the great dominatrix to do this for you. He was like, yeah, slap me silly. They start filming. She slaps him across the face, and his eyeball pops
Shut
out.
the fuck up. And the dominatrix is the one telling the story?
Yeah, it's just hanging by the optical thread.
What the in the actual fuck?
Then he's like, oh, I should have told you I had surgery yesterday, so it really is a bad time to have hit me right there.
Wait, he was just casual about it? What the fuck?
So that's a story that was shared with us once, and we made a recording, but it didn't have a good enough beginning and end, so I really have to get back to her and get another recording of that.
Oh man, but that's a rough piece of feedback to receive. I just gave you I smacked a dude in a porn thing, his eye pops out, and you're like, it needs some work.
Yeah, we need more of a hero's journey here.
Oh man. Oh, Kevin. Thank you for coming on, man. Jesus.
Thank you.
So people should obviously go check out Risk. We've been talking about plenty.
Risk, you can find it anywhere where podcasts are or at risk-show.com. And on on Twitter, I'm also at the Kevin Allison or Risk itself.
Were
is
you
at
mad when
Risk
you
Show.
found at Kevin Allison was
Yeah,
I'm
the
at
two of
the
us
Billy
know each
Procida.
other. Yeah.
It's rough. You're like a son of a bitch squatting on that handle.
Well, he's the guy who has to deal with people, sending him kinky crap all the time on Twitter.
Maybe he's been getting all these like sexy scat submissions, and he's like, "The fuck do I do
holding
with
on
this?"
to them,
Yeah.
hoarding them.
Hoarding the scat submissions. Anywhere else people should go check you out? Just go riskthatshow.com.
Yeah, and then on Twitter at Risk Show or on Facebook at Risk Show as well.
Awesome, Kevin. Thanks so much for coming by. Why don't you say goodbye to everyone?
Thank you.
What a conversation, people. Oh, man, just a couple of slutty fellows. I felt like I had a lot to aspire to after talking with Kevin. Oh, it was fun. If you check the show notes, you'll see a list of the various books that Kevin referenced during this episode. Perv, Sexual Outsiders, Taboo. You'll see links to those. You also see links to Kevin Allison in the show notes. Go check out his show, Risk, the storytelling podcast. Shoot us a tweet. Let us know what you thought about the show. He's at the Kevin Allison. I'm at the Billy Procida. Use the hashtag #ManWhorePodcast to let us know what you thought. Again, I have Instagram. If you're not following me, you're fucking up. Go follow me at the Billy Procida. You can also interact with your fellow fan whores on the Man Whore Podcast subreddit. There are individual comment threads for every episode. It's the closest thing we have to a message board. For all you Redditors, that's r/Man Whore Podcast. And again, one last time, I need you all to go fill out this brief survey at manwhorepod.com/survey. It is immensely helpful for me. Takes no time on your part. And your email address does not go to a bunch of like spammy marketers. It just goes to me, I promise. I'm the only spammy marketer you want in your life anyway, right? manwhorepod.com/survey. Help a whore out. Next week we got Glamazon Tayomi. But until we get to the goddess known as Tayomi, y'all enjoy yourselves. Wish me a happy birthday on June 5th. That's Monday. And stay slutty.